Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat?
The NFL draft is in the books. The Saints checked a lot of boxes that they normally do. They drafted some needs. They traded up. They took small school guys. All the things that the Saints normally do. Let's recap it all. Kat Terrell from ESPN joins us. She's on Twitter at @Kat_Terrell. Covers the Saints. Kat, we appreciate the time. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. There's a lot to go through with this draft for the Saints. I just want to start kind of with a broad overview from you, though. Your take on their class as a whole here in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I think they did exactly what they needed to do. They didn't waste too much draft capital by trading up. They, got an offensive tackle, which is by far their biggest need. I thought cornerback is probably going to be a big need either this year or next year, depending on what happens with Marshawn Lattimore. So I really thought that the first two picks were, kind of exactly what they needed. And then Dennis Allen said he kind of looked at the last picks as developmental prospects, which is kind of interesting way to put it. Day three prospects are developmental prospects almost always, with the exception of some circumstances. But it's kind of interesting that he said that, just because, I think that this team isn't a team where every spot is full, and they have the luxury of not drafting guys who can contribute right away. But I do think that a couple of these guys probably will find spots pretty quickly in the lineup.
We're going to go through a lot of them here momentarily, but I did want to kind of ask, were you at all surprised that they didn't trade up from the fifth round? Like, that they actually stood pat after trading up 4 spots in the second round, never made a pick in round 3 or 4?
Maybe a little, just because that tends to be their MO, and they even admitted it was really hard for them to do. I think once they got to 4, I figured they would kind of stand pat at that point. But yeah, I was a little surprised they didn't try to move up to maybe 3, but maybe they just didn't find a trade that they felt comfortable with.
All right, let's get into a few of the guys. You mentioned Taliesin Fuanga, of course, the offensive tackle they took with 14 overall. And, man, it was interesting to hear Dennis Allen talk about him after, and even Jim Nagy about could he play right tackle or left tackle. I think everyone's immediate thought when they see him and they see that he spent most of the time at right tackle, given the health issues that Ryan Ramczyk has. I mean, you can definitely infer something there. I mean, do you think it's more of a indictment on what they feel like they can get out of Ryan Ramczyk, or do they really believe they can just flip him over to the left side of the line and let him play there?
Well, I think that even if Ramczyk finds a way to play this year and get through a whole season, we're still looking at a short-term career here, in my opinion. I think that it's going to be a problem that, he has deteriorating cartilage in his knee. It's not really fixable. Maybe you can get through a season. So even if you're thinking he can get through 2024, there's absolutely no guarantee he could get through 2025. So you have to address it, especially when you're looking at a position where you need a tackle on both sides, and it is very hard to just go out and find the next great tackle. I mean, you saw a number of tackles go off the board in the first round for a reason. So, maybe they were looking at left tackle and they just couldn't work with how the board fell. So I think that they feel confident that he probably can play on either side, but, they're probably thinking that he is Ramczyk's a replacement eventually, whether, that's this year or next year.
So what do they do with the other tackle spot in that regard then? Because, I mean, look, they take the guy out of Eastern Kentucky in the 7th round, but we just got done talking about how that's developmental, right, on day 3. Right. Is this obviously the next question would be free agency, but is it as simple as bringing back Andres Pete, or do they potentially maybe look elsewhere there?
I don't know. They seem pretty dismissive about Andres Pete right now, which I find kind of interesting. Last time Mickey Loomis was asked about him, he just said, well, he's a free agent, which is typically what he says when, he doesn't really want to discuss it and also doesn't want to insult the player. So it kind of feels like they've moved on, but, that's just me inferring. So even if they did re-sign him, they'd still have to account for all the dead money. So it's not like even if they sign Pete for, minimum, that he would count minimum against the cap. Because his contract voided, he would count a lot against the cap. So that is one thing. I mean, they might not care, but I think they will kind of look at all options. They did add players in free agency. I don't think they've given up on Trevor Penning yet, and I don't think they should. It's year 3, and a critical year for him. But I think, as they said, he was a small school player, so there is going to be a learning curve there. So I don't think they've given up on him, but I also think they're trying to be realistic and explore all their options and not just try to force. Well, Penning was a first rounder, so we're again going to try to start him if he's not ready and if he's not there yet.
Speaking of Mickey Loomis at his most recent media availability there, previewing the draft, he was asked about Marshawn Lattimore and if he'll be on the roster, and he said yes. And then I believe it was you, actually, who followed up wanting more on that, and Mickey admitted to trying to avoid the question. And then they go draft Kool-Aid McKinstry. What does that mean, if anything, for Marshawn Lattimore this year in New Orleans?
Yeah, initially when he said that, I was surprised that people just kind of let that go because I think he is kind of looking at it from a perspective of, well, I'm going to say yeah because I'm always expecting anyone to be on the team until they're not, I guess, or until someone makes us a good offer. So it was interesting that he did that because he's been around forever. He has to know by saying that creates a huge headline. Marshawn Lattimore on the team in 2024, that means he's not getting traded. I think that they understand that it will be difficult to trade him. His contract is significant, and so another team would have to want to both pick up the contract and give the Saints something acceptable in return. Not to mention he's been hurt 2 years in a row. There are a lot of variables. So I think that they're just trying to say as little as possible, honestly. That's probably why he's trying to avoid the question. He doesn't want to add fuel to the fire or just say anything that could, make the situation worse if Lattimore indeed is on the team in 2024. But, once you look at Lattimore's contract next year, it becomes significantly easier to move on from that. So it's probably the same thing as the tackle situation. Even if it's not a starting situation this year, then maybe it is for next year. So I do think that those two were good picks in that they filled a need and probably could help fill a future need. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words today.
That happens to the best of us. You should have heard me in the first segment. Kat Terrell is our guest. She's on Twitter at @Kat_Terrell, covers the Saints, obviously for ESPN. Kat, maybe the most intriguing pick the Saints made was their first one in round 5 when they took Spencer Rattler. Is Spencer Rattler the favorite to win the backup quarterback job?
Yeah, that one is intriguing. It makes me wonder how they truly feel about Jake Haener. And there's a lot of different ways you could go with why they made that pick. They were saying, well, he was just the highest rated player on the board, which is an easy thing to say, an easy reason to give. Maybe they don't like what they've seen out of Haener, or maybe they just think, well, we had a lot of fifth-round picks. We want the best guy for the backup job, and if these two can compete for it and we can develop them, then there's nothing wrong with that. Because a lot of people will say, well, it's a wasted pick, but I mean, let's be honest. On day 3, a ton of picks are wasted picks. It just gets more scrutiny because it's a quarterback. So I'm really intrigued. I feel like they would find some way to keep them all around, whether it's practice squad. I guess you could put Rattler and Haener on the active roster. I mean, this is really premature, but I don't know. I don't think one of these veterans are going to be on the active roster. I think that maybe they keep a veteran on the practice squad. I mean, it's not a bad idea to have a vet around with these young guys, but usually you don't see 2 young guys on the active roster because having 3 quarterbacks is kind of a luxury. Having 2 of those be developmental guys, I don't know if I can recall a situation where I've seen that recently. Now I'm going to have to go check and find that out because I'm kind of intrigued.
So when you say keep all of them, you don't mean like Peterman and all 5, right?
Yeah, not all 5.
Okay.
When I say all of them, I mean Haener, Rattler, and Carr, and then maybe you keep a veteran on the practice squad, or you have him in a situation where you can call on him. Sometimes some teams do that, even if they're not on the roster. I think that would probably be overkill, though. It's so hard to say when we didn't see Haener play last year, and he was suspended the first 6 games of the season, right? So I'd be surprised if they just thought after 1 year they're moving on. But it does happen. But with this team, we've just seen it happen so few times, because despite what Dennis Allen said, with him saying we drafted quite a few quarterbacks when Drew Brees was here, that's not the case. They actually barely ever drafted quarterbacks when Brees was there. So it's just kind of unknown territory for people that have watched this team in recent memory.
It's one of the more intriguing storylines, honestly, for me to watch as the offseason goes on, that backup spot, because it's been such an important position for the Saints the last, 5-6 years? I mean, with the end of Brees' career, and then, of course, with Jameis going down with the ACL, and then Derek Carr last year. I mean, they've always had that veteran, and now where you could be looking at 2 young guys, it's kind of uncharted territory for them in more than a half decade. So that's why I look at that and I go, they keep bringing in guys to kind of compete, you'd think, with Jake Haener. And, it's like, man, can anyone unseat him? Where do they go there? So it's just, that one's going to be fun to watch kind of throughout camp. Kat, we touched on offensive tackle. After looking at this draft, whether it be through free agency or guys you kind of already have or whatnot, what are the biggest remaining holes for the Saints roster so far?
Safety, maybe. I think you look at Matthew, and he's going to be the starter this year. Added another year in his contract, but still took a pay cut to do so. So you're not really looking at Matthew as a really long-term guy, as much as that I'm sure pains people to listen to. Although you never know with Tyron. So maybe I'm completely wrong, and he plays several more years. But you still have to account for it. So with May gone, and then Matthew, not knowing how long he'll play, I think it's probably always a good idea to keep adding DBs. Dennis Allen loves to say you can never have too many cornerbacks. I think a lot of times, sometimes they go with less safeties than cornerbacks, but I think as a whole, you probably never have too many DBs. So they might keep looking at that. That would be the one spot I would say, well, maybe they want to just keep looking on the market just to add some depth.
She is Kat Terrell, ESPN.com, covers the Saints on Twitter at @Kat_Terrell. Good enough to spend some time with us here today, recapping Saints draft, looking at remaining holes, things of that nature. Rookie minicamp next up on the docket for the New Orleans Saints, season fast approaching. Kat, we appreciate the time as always. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.